Hello, and welcome to Real Film Snobs. I'm Angela Yeager. I'm pleased to have with me back on the show again, Autumn Edwards. Welcome to the show, Autumn.
Hello, thank you for having me again.
Of course, and we are here back with our second episode about the great Japanese auteur director Obayashi. For those who missed the first episode, we explored Obayashi's earlier films, including the one he's probably most famous for, which is House. But as Autumn is going to explain here shortly, she's probably just now finding out she's going to explain that. Obayashi had a very long career with a lot of different types of films, and we're going to be exploring his middle period today. Autumn, can you remind the audience, in case they missed our amazing first episode, why Obayashi is important and why you think, I know you think he's probably one of the greatest directors of all time. So,
Absolutely. Yeah, Obayashi just has a wonderful sensibility where he's able to blend his avant-garde, expressions with like really serious topics at the same time. So even House, his most famous, well-known movie and stuff, people remember it for all the glitz and glamour and fun stuff, but it's also imbued with a great deal of like pathos, and there's a lot of history and stuff channeled into there, like Japanese history with the war and everything. And so I think he just manages to strike a really wonderful balance between like wowing the audience with, fun visuals and a quirky style, but also adding a little bit extra that you wouldn't expect to see from most commercial filmmakers.
I think one of the interesting things as a newbie to his films, other than House, I had never seen any Obayashi films until Autumn and I became friends, and now I have to say I am ahead of the internet now because I went on IMDb today to look up what they had about the first film we'll be talking about in a second, and it had zero user reviews on IMDb, zero for this movie,
That's
which I know
crazy.
I think you think this first one might be one of his greatest films, and there was no user reviews on IMDb. Outside of Japan, I feel like his films aren't very well known, but I feel like when you go on Letterboxd, for instance, there's a lot of people talking about them. So I feel like there's a resurgence of appreciation for his films. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I definitely agree. We're starting to see more of his stuff put out into, the mainstream of at least cinephiles. His movies are making it into theaters, or at least they did. Like we had Labyrinth of Cinema playing up in Portland, and I managed to go see that in theaters. A lot of his older films are being put out on Blu-rays now. They're getting restorations. Like Third Window Films had the 80s Katakawa years, which is a set of 4 discs. And then you have the anti-war trilogy that they did as well. And then Vinegar Syndrome just put out Beijing Watermelon, which we're going to be talking about soon on disc. So I feel like it's definitely getting out there more. And I'm really glad to see that because he's phenomenal. And I think people, should appreciate the breadth of his work.
Yeah, for sure. 4 years after his death, his films are finally coming out, and Criterion Channel just finally put up some other films other than House, which they've had House all along, but they put up, in fact, a few of the ones we're reviewing today. So let's get into it because I know that these films, we're also seeing, I think, in my opinion, more complexity as we get into his middle to late period. I mean, not that his earlier films weren't complex, but I think if you look at something like The Aimed School in our first episode, it definitely has a little bit more of a comedy, cheesy, sci-fi, a lot more fun feeling. These films, while still having elements of fun, are definitely getting into more serious themes. So I'll start with our first film, Bound for the Fields, the Mountains, and the Seacoast from 1986. That's a mouthful. It's set during a very nationalistic period leading up to World War II. There's a teenager who has just been transferred to a new school, and he starts to get into kind of like a little mini war, a kids type of war, if you will, with another person, with another kid who goes to the school. but he also takes a romantic interest in that kid's stepsister. So then they learn that the sister is about to be sold off to a brothel to pay for the father's debts, and they decide to stop their fighting to try to save her. Um, this film really took me by surprise. It's a longer than the earlier Obayashi films. It has the first half is a lot of playing because they're basically playing at war, really. And so it's a very interesting juxtaposition because the kids are playing war while the actual country is preparing for war and getting very nationalistic, militaristic. So we see these things juxtaposed with the kids' play. And but there's still a lot of playfulness, and I have to admit, like probably midway through it, I thought, okay, where is this going? I'm going, and then it starts to turn as we learn about the sister's fate, and she's a great character as well. And actually, like a lot of Obayashi's films, not one of these underwritten female characters. And we start to see where it's going in a very tragic direction. And it becomes, in my opinion, kind of one of the most profoundly anti-war films in a way. And I think I'm going to steal this from someone on Letterboxd who said that it was probably one of the best films about the way children um, interpret and are affected by wartime trauma. And I would say that's definitely true up there with maybe something like Grave of the Fireflies, really, in terms of a film about how children are impacted by war. I just think it's absolutely a profound movie. So, and I gave it 4.5 stars, which is unusual for me on a first watch. So, curious what I know you love this film, so I'm anxious to hear what you have to say
Hmm.
about it.
Yeah, I think it's an absolute masterpiece, and like you said, a great representation of how like children are affected by war. It's really interesting to compare it to something like 24 Eyes, though, which is also about, children growing up in wartime and being affected by that. This one is much more playful, but even so, I find it just as tragic as 24 Eyes, especially by the end. Spoiler alert, everybody goes up in smoke. They all get hit by the nuclear bomb, and it actually really deeply affected me on this rewatch. I ended up crying. And I actually agree, like that girl is a phenomenal character. I love that in this movie we can see so much cinematic influence on Obayashi being channeled through here. Like that girl becomes basically a Joan of Arc character, and by
Mm-hmm.
the end she's literally, burnt alive for her beliefs and everything, and trying to live the way she wants to. And I love just like the slapstick of it all. It's super fun. It's very funny. I love that he just has a complete disregard for like spatial continuity and, like time and stuff. He's just having a lot of fun here because he's channeling it through these children.
Yeah.
Um, and I was just going to say, I also really appreciate the way that it works music into it because that's another one of Obayashi's preoccupations. All of his movies, I feel like music is very central to it. And here you see the way that it's used to like influence these children and work them into this nationalistic fervor and get them ready for war. Like they go to school to the sound of beating drums and like they're marching and everything. And so they're just growing up in this environment where everything has been co-opted by war, and it's the only perspective they can have, and it's really sad.
It's true. It's also he's one of the few directors. I mean, I have to say, and it's actually a little bit of a criticism of a later film I have. It's very difficult to merge the things he's doing. I mean, there is some physical slapstick comedy in this movie, the type of things you would see, in a Buster Keaton movie, for instance, merged with these really, really heavy themes of trauma and war and being sold into prostitution. I mean, very, very heavy themes. And in this film, I think it really works. I think somehow he's managed to do it, but it's because I think it's through children's play. Like a lot of the stuff when the kids are playing is very funny. Like they have the gang of the kids. Also, I just have to note because I also watched a Katano movie recently where all the characters were just named after their appearances. So one was Baldy and another one was Chubby or whatever. The same thing with the kids here. Like there's a kid that's just, I just think it's funny how they do that a lot in Japanese movies. It's like, well,
Hmm.
you're overweight, so you're fatty now, and you're bald, so you're Baldy, and that's your name
Yeah.
now. And
Yeah, I feel like that's true of a lot of Asian films for
it's
sure.
true in Asian films. I have to say it helps me remember the characters' names because
Hmm.
otherwise I
Yeah.
wouldn't remember them. But but yeah, the ending. I mean, when I I should have known it was coming, but when they get on that boat and she sets herself on fire, I was just really taken aback. I almost don't feel like I remembered anything that happened after that. To me, it was almost like that was the end of the movie. I was just kind of so traumatized by that. That's all
Mhm.
I saw. So, yeah,
I
it's
also think
definitely
it's
worth
one
a
of his most
rewatch for sure.
beautiful films. Like aesthetically, I think it's absolutely stunning. It's shot in beautiful black and white. Every composition is absolutely perfectly crafted. Like it's really stunning. Like I mentioned Passion of Joan of Arc earlier, like there are shots that really evoke that, not just her burning on the raft in the end, but like there's a shot of her amongst the flowers that's just like so absolutely gorgeous. She's just like holding a flower and the way it's framed and the depth of field and everything is just completely perfect about it. It's so
Yeah.
stunning to look at.
And this one is one of the harder ones to find in that it isn't on Criterion streaming, but it is available, as you mentioned, on Blu-ray. So if people are willing to make the investment and just buy something without having seen it, I would recommend this one
I
for
actually
that.
don't think this one is available on Blu-ray yet,
Oh, it's
unfortunately.
not on Blu-ray.
No,
Okay.
Beijing Watermelon is on Blu-ray.
Okay. So it's really hard to find, which might be one of the reasons it doesn't have
Mhm.
very many user
I
reviews. So
think you can find
hopefully
it
this
on
one.
Internet Archive, your best
Internet
friend.
Archive. Okay, so there's the place to find it, folks. Go to Internet Archive to find this one. Okay, so definitely a classic, 4+ stars for me, and I know also for you. So let's move on to our next one, which is a little bit lighter, I
Mhm.
think.
Yeah, so our next one is Beijing Watermelon. It's definitely a little bit lighter, but it's at the same time one of the more serious Obayashi films as far as not heavy themes, but the way it's treated, like the formal craft of it. It's very straightforward as far as narratives go and things, which I feel like is kind of a change of pace from what a lot of people expect with Obayashi. But Beijing Watermelon is the story of a Japanese greengrocer who befriends a group of poor Chinese students who have come to Japan. And it's really fascinating because it's the real life account of a man that Obayashi himself met. And this man got a story in the paper and everything. And it basically follows him befriending this group of children and giving more and more of himself, sometimes at the expense of his family and his business and everything. And so I think it's a very beautiful, very touching story, though, about, friendship and kindness and just like lending a helping hand to those in need. It's a very beautiful sentiment of like international cooperation. And I just think it's, one of Obayashi's best in the way it's so humanistic.
Yeah, it is interesting. He's kind of a stubborn character. I got frustrated with him because he basically is letting his whole business fall to ruin. And his poor wife, she's really the victim of the movie for a lot of it. 'Cause she's just trying to hold everything together. She starts doing all of his work for him. She's trying to keep the store going. Meanwhile, he's just out having fun with these Chinese, students who are in Japan to learn the language and study, and then they go back, and then he gets lonely when they go back and they leave him. But it is a very interesting movie from the perspective that China and Japan, of course, have not had always the best relationship either. And he's kind of takes this on like, hey, we don't have to like hate some people just because they're from some other place that we've
Mhm.
maybe gone to war with at times. Like, he finds a lot of good, positive qualities in the Chinese students, including, how just grateful they are for all of his help. So this is one that has a lot of music in it and really beautiful music. That's actually one of my favorite things about this movie. The Chinese students sing a lot and just break out into
Mhm.
song randomly. Not sure if they probably did that in real life, probably not, but it was beautiful. There's just some scenes of them like, on the water, performing and singing, and I just thought those were quite lovely. So it does
Mhm.
have little less slapstick humor than some of the other ones, though. And I don't think anyone's depantsed in this particular movie,
No, I
which
don't
he
think
he
so.
likes to do in a lot of his movies. But it's lighter in that it's not. I mean, not everyone dies at the end, for instance. So it has kind of a sentimental aspect to it as well. At one point, the neighbors start making fun of the grocer and calling him, China Fever, or they have these different like
Mhm.
nicknames for him. The part I thought was interesting because we watched this together is there's something he does at the end, and I don't want to give it away for people who haven't seen it because this film is easier to find than some of the other ones. Um, he kind of breaks the wall and has the characters, and it only happens at the very very end. And I'm really curious what you thought about that technique that he employed.
Mhm. Yeah, I thought it was really fascinating. The first time I watched it, I don't know that I really grasped why it was happening. I was more just like kind of floored that it was, and I was enjoying it. This time around, though, I think it really added a lot of depth to the movie because, again, this being based on the real life, account of a real man, addressing us, the audience, like very directly. It's kind of like Obayashi's inserting himself into the movie, and
Hmm.
he's telling us like the story of how they were supposed to go to Beijing to film the end of this movie and everything. And, he's reminding you that these were real people, these were real Chinese exchange students and things that he was using, which is another fascinating aspect. And it actually becomes really sad when recognize the reason why they weren't able to go to Beijing, which is because of the Tiananmen Square massacre. And so that cut their trip short. They were supposed to go over there, but then they couldn't meet up again because of that. And I find that, it's very tragic. And
Hmm.
this is just such a beautiful movie as far as like it's kind of an elegy for like, a beautiful time that they had.
Yeah, I thought that that it seemed sudden on my first watch. So I'd be interested if I see it again, if I appreciate it more like you did, because it took me out of the movie. And I thought, well, even though they tell you at the beginning, this is based on a true story, but he even says it's a movie, it's not real life, but we're going to do our best. But then it switches to where he even shows them setting up shots, and you see Obayashi in one of the shots at the end setting up the fake airplane that they're making to supposedly quote unquote travel to China, which of course they didn't actually do in the movie, but they did in real life. And he's also reminding you, though, which I think is very interesting, hey, you're watching a movie, which, of course, duh, yeah, of course we know we're watching a movie, but it
Mhm.
is an interesting thing because I thought, oh, that's what the plane looks like when they shoot fake plane scenes in movies. Because it really takes you out of the movie, but in an interesting way. I think
Mhm.
it really had me analyzing the aspects of like truth versus reality and making a movie based on a true story. It's like he wants to purposefully kind of remind you, oh, by the way, this isn't real life. Real life is better still than movies in a way, although
Mhm.
I might disagree with that sometimes. But anyway, so yeah, but I thought that was really, gosh, I thought about it for a long time afterwards because I don't think he just does things just to do it. So I thought, especially because I've never seen him do that again before in a movie. So I kept thinking,
Mhm.
what an interesting technique to do at the very end of this
Yeah.
kind of based on a true story type of thing. I mean, of course, we see biopics all the time or different movies where Hollywood movies, for instance, where they show photos of the real people at the end, and then you go, wow, they're not anywhere as good looking as the actors who played them or whatever. But this was different because it's actually part of the story. He's like literally showing the film crew setting up in the plane, and very
Mhm.
interesting.
Yeah, I think it makes it more of like a tribute to the people that worked with him, all those actors and everything and their time together. I think it's a really beautiful sentiment in that way.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, let's move on to our next film.
All right. Our next one is called The Rocking Horsemen. This is much lighter than anything else we're going to review today for sure. It's basically the story of a young boy who forms a band with his friends in high school. It's one of my favorite subgenres. I absolutely love high schoolers forming bands. It's just always a good time, and in Obayashi's hands, it's a great time. The music they play is really interesting because it's very American influenced. It opens with shots of the Ventures playing, and it's basically this boy just getting like his world rocked by hearing, rock and roll music for the first time like that. And he just becomes obsessed, and he uses it as a way to like, make friends and like craft a life for himself at school. And I just think it's a great movie. It's super fun. It's good vibes, and yeah, I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, it's fun. It's not my. I also like that genre, but I even post like on Letterbox that it doesn't beat some of my favorites in this category. We Are the Best by Lucas Moodysson is one of the greatest people forming a band movie of all time. I'll put that out there. That's a plug for We Are the Best. Exclamation point at the end of the title.
Swing
Which
Girls too.
Yes. It's also about girls, which I do prefer girls forming a band because boys forming a rock band is a little bit more cliched. Yeah, but this makes it fun because they're doing the Ventures, for folks who don't know, did kind of this surf sound, it's an instrumental rock. And so it's very interesting seeing this group of like Japanese teenage boys taking on this sound. And then none of them know how to play at first, but they're like, oh, well, except for one. My favorite character in the movie is the boy who's studying to become a priest, like his father. And he and he wants to he first tells them like they're trying to come up with a name for their band, and he's like coming up with all these things related to priests, and they're like, dude, like you're the only one who wants to be a priest. We're not going to call our band, I forgot what the
Precious
title was.
Priest.
What is it?
I think it was Precious Priest.
Yeah, Precious Priest or something. And
Yeah.
they're like, no, we're not going to be that. So they go with Rocking Horsemen instead for their band name, and it's a lot of fun. I do thought it was funny, like when they perform finally, then like the whole town gets into it. Everyone's rocking
Hmm.
out, and yeah, it's definitely a much more feel good. There's no like anti-war sentiment. The most that the kind of the most dramatic thing is some tension with the main kid and his parents, but even they are actually pretty supportive, partially because his character up until then he was just kind of jumping from thing to thing. He hadn't really gotten passionate about anything. And so they were just excited to see him finally take an interest in something, even if in this case it was the guitar, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah. And then when
Good.
they go on stage, I think they play a Beatles song. And so they're
Hmm.
doing,
And Johnny Be
fairly
Good at the end.
Johnny
Yeah.
Be Good, which, how many times do we have to rip off Chuck Berry? But okay. So yeah, it's a fun movie. It's like for me, this was more of like a 3.5 star movie than a 4 or 4.5. But like you said, it's just a lot of fun. It's definitely on the lighter side.
Yeah, I think it's another great example of, again, the international aspects of Obayashi and how he brings all his, foreign influence over and like fuses it with his own style and everything. And this is just another case of fantastic characterization by Obayashi. He's so good about forming unique characters that feel like, if not real people, they feel like they're at least fleshed out and they have, reasons among their actions, and they're just always interesting. Like all these boys feel like, real boys that you could have met in high school and that, they're just kind of
Oh yeah, big
dorky.
time.
Yeah. And like you said, the priest kid is absolutely the best. He's so funny. I'm like, I definitely knew that guy in high school. He's just like taking the shit out of everyone and just messing
Hmm.
with everyone. It's really funny the way he like kind of abuses his position as a priest, as like a trusted figure in the community and things, but in a very like casual, childish kind of way. It's kind of harmless. But I think this is another great example of, again, like Obayashi in most of his movies, really, I think, is very loving in the way that he portrays like locations and stuff. And that's something that I really appreciate about him. He really is just the way he shoots the cities and towns that his stories take place in. You can tell that he has a great deal of respect for it. It feels very lived in. It like feels very, real because he's not, he's shooting on location and just like I don't know, the way the characters interact with it, they always feel like they've lived in there their whole lives, and it's just like phenomenal the way that he highlights kind of a different place in every movie, and I really appreciate that.
And he often shot in his hometown,
Onomichi,
yeah, and I think it's what is the name of the town?
Onomichi.
And that's one of the reasons I feel like there's a familiarity, when you watch the movie, sometimes like, oh, we're back in his hometown again. And of course, that town
Mhm,
has this famous temple, that he often shot in his movies as well. But yeah,
mhm,
you definitely get a sense. Almost always, I mean, I don't know about in every film, but he almost always shoots on location, and that you definitely get a sense of the place, which makes it feel more like a community than I think you
mhm.
see in a lot of films
And
that
if
are
you think
shot on
of something
sets.
like The Island Closest to Heaven, or, like even, yeah, Bound for the Fields, Mountains, and the Seacoast, and like he shoots in lots of different locations. Like this one is in Kanonji and Kanagawa and stuff. And he has a movie called The Deserted City, which is about this beautiful canal town that I can't remember the name of, but like he's very conscious and aware of the places that he's in, and I love that,
Hmm.
like as a document.
Yeah, I love it too. And he doesn't shoot in Tokyo hardly ever, which
Hmm.
is like the most obvious place. That's where we see like, I don't know, 60%, 70% of Japanese movies shot. So it's really refreshing to see all these other fantastic locations all over Japan. It reminds you like, oh yeah, outside of Tokyo, there's like this whole other rest of the country.
Yeah.
So so a lot of fun. This one is easier to find. It's on Criterion Channel and on Blu-ray. So I think, right?
I don't think so. I think
It
this
is
might
on
be another
Criterion.
like
No, I'm pretty
it,
sure it's on
it might be on
Criterion.
Criterion now. I'm not sure,
Yeah, I
but
think it's part of the new Obayashi collection. I know the very next one is, so I'm pretty sure Rocking Horseman is in there too, and Beijing Watermelon's easier to
yeah.
find. So we'll move on to our next one, which I just watched last night. Sada, am I saying it right, or is it
Sada.
Sada? Is it Sada?
Sada.
Okay, thank
Hmm.
you. We're still working on Angela's Japanese pronunciation, and we probably will be for the rest of my life. So, Autumn's helping me though. Sada from 1998. The film is, this is also based on, this is another real life, but much more famous real life story of Sada. The movie, In the Realm of the Senses, is also based on her.
Mhm.
She became a celebrity. That's kind of a weird
Sada
way
Abe.
to put it. 1936, after strangling her lover and slicing off his genitals. Sounds like a very serious movie, but this is Obayashi, so it's not quite as serious as you might think. It actually follows the life of her, and it's really from her perspective, unlike the other films that have been made about her. This film goes back to Sada's childhood briefly, and then into when she's actually raped as a 14-year-old girl. And because of this, she basically knows that she can't be married off to anyone respectable, which is awful because it's a very violent rape and it's something that really traumatizes her in a way for the rest of her life. But she is basically sold off to be a geisha, and then from there becomes a prostitute, where she has her own kind of set of high, mostly wealthy clients. And so it explores kind of her personality and her psyche and how she feels about sex. And she has a very complicated relationship with sex, and that she actually really loves it in a way and loves being with men, but it's in these very like, it's hard to explain, but it's a very odd movie in that I think people would have a hard time. I had a hard time in parts of it with his usual blend of comedy, which he does
Hmm.
bring into this, and slapstick humor with a woman who's basically been exploited her whole life, and those themes. Some of it works really well. Some of it I was a little bit cringing at. Particularly, there's a scene where this guy who's been like just a friend of hers, not one of her lovers, but he's hiding in a closet. I think you know which scene I'm talking
Hmm.
about. And then he ends up seeing her working all day in her room, i.e., being a prostitute. And then he comes out of the closet at the end of the day and he was like, "Oh, I'm so horny." And he just attacks her. And I was like, but it's done in a slapsticky way, like a physical. Yeah, it just didn't all work for me 100%. I will say what works, it's a beautiful looking film. We talked about Bound for the Fields. I think that one's even better looking, but this film this is another one where he juxtaposes between color and black and white throughout. And I've never seen a filmmaker do that so successfully as he does.
Yeah, he's bringing that technique back from, the one with the motorcycles that I can't remember the name, his motorbike or her island. Yeah, no, I think this one was really fascinating. It's kind of a return to form for Obayashi as far as like formally, he gets a lot more creative, a lot more, like different editing styles, and again, the black and white and color stuff.
Yeah.
But I was really surprised by like how empathetic this was. I felt to Sada, like because like you said, so many of those movies or like stories about her, they're definitely going to paint her out as this crazy woman that just like did this out of nowhere, whatever. But in this one, it feels like, we really get to, stay with her and learn her like perspective. And I don't know, it felt like I had a much deeper understanding of like where she was coming from, and it feels like so much more tragic because, you see the way that the men have taken advantage of her in her life and the way that she has difficulty coping with it and like forming relationships now because of all that. And so I was just really impressed with like, that aspect of it because so easily it could just be, a crazy whatever entertainment.
Yeah. So this is
Mhm.
4 stars for you?
Yeah, I give it 4 stars.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So with that, check out some Obayashi films. Get going, people. It's on Criterion Channel. There's some few there, Internet Archive. Seek them out. Thank you once again, Autumn, for being on the show. Appreciate you. As
Hmm.
always, have a great day and great movies. Bye.
Bye.